right, so I want to introduce a wonderful speaker tonight, Judith Ragir, who is a Zen Buddhist priestess, a Byakuran in Buddhist circles. That's what she's referred to. She's a Dharma teacher in the Zen lineage of Katagiri Roshi. She was instrumental in founding the Clouds in the Water Zen Center in St. Paul, Minnesota, where she was the guiding teacher for 9 years and is currently retired in LA, but who knows what will happen then. She's an accomplished artist. Ragir makes Buddhist-inspired quilts, which are on display in Buddhist centers around the US. Her written pieces have appeared in many anthologies, including The Eightfold Path, Zen Teaching in Challenging Times, The Hidden Lamp, The Path of Compassion, Seeds of Virtue, Seeds of Change, Seeds of Virtue, Seeds of Change, and Receiving the Mirror. Her newest book, Entangling Karma, Intimate Zen Stories on Healing Trauma, is available through the San Francisco Zen Center online store. In the 70s and 80s, Judith was a dancer in the Trisha Brown Dance Company in New York City and also appeared in 2 one-woman shows of her own choreography. After her dance career, she was a doctor of Chinese medicine using acupuncture, acupressure, and Chinese herbs until she became a Zen priest in 96. All right, so Judith has just recently moved to LA, and I turn it over to you, and so looking forward to this. Thank you, Judith. It's so sad it's the last one.
Okay. So I really appreciate this group. It has such high standards for who speaks, and just wonderful. It's just a wonderful thing. And it's wonderful for me because when I go to a usual meeting, I can't bring in Buddhism because of the traditions. So this is a place that's been very integrating for me to bring both my Buddhist experience and my 12-step experience together. And also, although you could go on my website, I have lots of talks, 12-step in Buddhism, but this is the latest. This is kind of my more mature part of myself speaking. So this whole series has been very important to me. Partially, I'm not continuing because this year has also been a really intense year. As many of you who have been here know, the first half of the year, my son was ill. That's why I ended up in Los Angeles. And the second part of the year, I deconstructed my house in Minnesota, put it on the market, sold the house in Minnesota, came to LA, bought a house in LA, on and on and on. So I'm in a huge, huge transition in my life. Kind of what I'm saying developmentally, it's the right transition for an older person. So, but it's very uprooting. So I'm going to take a little break.
So that's a little background. Oh, I'll just give my qualification. I came in a program in 1977. I first came into OA, Overeaters Anonymous, and then I couldn't stop drinking. They wanted me to stop drinking. I couldn't stop drinking, so I went to AA. In the 70s in New York City, AA was very into no altered chemistry. So I did what they told me. So I stopped drugs, drinking, overeating. And I did that for quite a while. Then I went to Al-Anon because I'm an adult child of an alcoholic, and because that has had a very powerful effect on my life in terms of my fears, my trust level, my ability to have relationships. So I'm 49 years sober. But I still, can you believe this? I still go to an Al-Anon meeting almost every day. And I go to OA meetings several times a week. And I'm still working. The 12 steps have really become very, very essential. They're the underpinning of my life, really. And Zen and Buddhism is also an underpinning, but they're completely entwined. So today we're going to talk about the 12th step, which is kind of what I just said. I use it every single day. It's completely entwined in my life, and it's not compartmentalized. Thankfully, all the different things I've done a lot of different things. 12-step, very intense therapy, trauma therapy. I'm also a sex survivor, a sexual abuse survivor. I've just done a million billion things, but it's funny, but now they're all coming together. And that sense that all of what I've done, steps 4 through 9, my spiritual life, is all starting to come together. And I can say I finally am starting to find some of the promises of the program or some peace, no matter what my outer circumstance is. So that's a lot to do with step 12. So let's read step 12. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we try to carry this message to others and to practice these principles in all of our affairs. So I'm going to work with each part. There's 3 parts, and I'll work with each part separately. So, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. So one thing that's very cool about the steps is no matter where you start, some of us start as deep atheists that we do not believe in God. We hate the religion of our childhood. We're very aversive to the word spirituality, and somehow we ended up in these program rooms anyway because of how difficult our life is. And this is one cheap place to get help. Some of us started with a lot of spiritual life. No, I wouldn't call it spiritual. I would call it religious life. Some of us start with a lot of church going. And the steps are really, what would be the right word? They articulate, if you actually do the steps, they're very granulated in getting you to a place where your life will change. If you do the steps, they are completely nuanced and you will change. And as you change, the idea of a spiritual influence becomes more and more available to you. So I'm very, I think about Montessori. She was an educator who would arrange the kindergarten room so that everybody would learn these very practical things. And I sometimes feel that the steps are like these Montessori steps. First you do this, then you do this, then you do this. And if you do these steps, it is the fertilizer, the structure for having a spiritual awakening. Now, what is a spiritual awakening? I went to the promises, so the promises are kind of through all of my notes. Our whole attitude and outlook on life will change, and we will know a new freedom and a new happiness. So one thing that I have gotten from my Buddhist studies is how do I look at my life from the largest, the hugest perspective? Not just my little self, my storyline of my victim storyline of how terrible my life has been, the victim storyline of my ancestry, the victim storyline, of being a survivor in many different ways. How do I look at my life from a larger point of view? And spirituality and Buddhism has really helped me do that. And meditation has really helped me get larger than just seeing my whole life from the perspective of these two eyes and this ego. All of a sudden, Katagiri Roshi, who was my root teacher, but he died in 1990. So I did study with him for 17 years. He was a major influence on my spiritual life. But he used to say, you have to look at your life if you're standing on Pluto. And at that time, Pluto was still a planet. But he said, you have to have a huge perspective of who you are and your right size in this world. One of my first spiritual experiences happened when I was like 16. I lived in Chicago. I would take the train from my suburb downtown by myself because I was completely alone. I didn't have friends and I didn't have family, but I would entertain myself. And one of the things I would do is go to downtown Chicago on a Saturday. And I would get off the train and I'd look around and I'd see how many thousands, and in a sense in Chicago, how many millions of people there are looking around at the tall buildings filled with rooms and toilets and refrigerators and people's stories. And it would give me a sense of my right size. I would feel relief that I'm just a human. I have a story, but so does everybody else. We're all living, we're all trying to do our best. And somehow that shift in my attitude really began my spiritual life of transcending, is that the right word? Digesting the past, digesting my story so I could be free to be happy. So I could be free to love myself, which I didn't do when I first came into program. Another word that Katagiri Roshi used for spiritual awakening is spiritual stability. That means our spiritual life is strong enough that it's an anchor, so that no matter what happens on the outside, no matter the ups and downs of a human life, and there are, like, even though I've been sober for so long, I still have downs. You know, my son had cancer. That's a down. And I don't have any control over that either. So, does my spiritual life anchor me through the what they call the vicissitudes, the ups and downs of a life? So that's what we're going for, to have an anchor in our program, an anchor in the fellowship, and an anchor in our spiritual understanding. And our anchor in self-love, that I deserve to be alive, that I'm not a bad person, in spite of things that I have done through my addiction, through my victimization, through hating myself. I've done bad things, really. But if you work the steps, you can free yourself. You can become just a human being. You can enhance your character assets as opposed to your character defects. And I don't really use the word defects anymore. I use, what is it? Habits that I use to compensate, safety defense mechanisms that I have used to feel safe when I didn't feel safe. And I didn't feel safe till I was 40 years old. I didn't feel very safe. And sometimes I still don't. But when I don't feel safe, I have an anchor. And part of the anchor is the spiritual schedule of my day. So in the 11th step in the big book, they write it out for you, these old men in the 40s. You know, I have a lot of objections to the patriarchy and the steps, not in the steps, but in the books. But the steps they got right, you know. So that gives me an anchor. What do I do in the morning? What do I do as I go through the day? And what do I do at night? That's a spiritual structure. It runs through every religion that I know of. It's the same spiritual structure. And I think I'm probably repeating myself, but the Muslims do a community prayer 5 times a day. Now that's a spiritual structure where the whole culture stops and prays. Wow. So if you strengthen your spiritual structure for the day, you will begin to have a stronger and stronger anchor that will get you through the ups and downs of life, the spiritual stability. The other thing I had to do in order to have an awakening, this was a kind of awakening, was to awaken to kindness. So I came from a family that was not kind. It was very harsh, it was very violent, it was very loud, it was very, very critical. I was criticized all the time. Of course, I had low self-esteem from that. And I hid because that was the best way to not get hurt. So all those habit patterns needed to change. And because of the steps, especially steps 4 through 9, they will change. That's my faith. That's my trust in the process that not I, but my spiritual life, my understanding of the truth about life can allow me to change my habit patterns and teach me what are better habit patterns. And kindness is a better habit pattern. It's a spiritual habit pattern. And the way I learned kindness was watching people in the program, watching who was kind to me. And then I started to learn kindness through meditation and going to Buddhist retreats and seeing what an environment of kindness, non-judgmentalness, not critical. What does that feel like? And could I make my inner environment like that? And I have worked very hard on that, and I still work on it because my inner critic is very, very strong, and my harshness is quite strong. And that's one of my spiritual principles that I work on every day. Could I be gentler? Could I be kinder? Could I go slower? Could I not be just filled with my own desires, but see what the whole network of people around me is doing? And right-sized go into the network and figure out what would be a wholesome, kind, appropriate action to take. Let me just talk a little bit about the network. We've talked several times about Indra's net, which is a metaphor for how we're all interconnected. And, you know, it's a net, and each of us is a one little pearl or one little jewel in the net. And when someone over here does something, it affects me. When I do something, it affects the whole net. So we're moving in response to the whole interconnected universe, but friendships and like even this meeting is an interconnected network of people, and we feel each other like that. So when I start to live my life, not isolated, self-reliant, self-will, pushing people around to get my way, when I start to see our interconnection, when I start to see the resonance that happens between me and other people, me and animals, me and the environment, what happens to me when I'm in LA as opposed to being in Minnesota, all of those things are a spiritual awakening into one of the primary Buddhist principles of interconnection. And when I'm feeling interconnected, when I'm feeling supported by the whole universe, which we are in every second, we're supported by everything. Of course, I used to say I wasn't supported by anything, and I was this isolated, sad sack. But now I see that is not true. Every moment, the earth is supporting me, my food is supporting me, people who love me, whether they're here or not, are supporting me. I am completely part of Indra's net. And when I get a glimmer at that, a hint of a hint, Philip Moffat would say, when I get a hint of a hint, I can call that an awakening. The other thing I wanted to talk about as awakening is sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. That's in the literature, right? And in Buddhism, there has been a debate about this for centuries. Is enlightenment sudden or gradual? Now, in my world, putting the opposites of sudden and gradual, they're opposites, right? So that's not enlightenment at all, because enlightenment is learning how to hold the world not in opposition, non-dualistically, and seeing that sudden and gradual work together constantly. And that's what I have felt. Working the steps is gradual. I do this work, I do that, I talk to people, I don't know what's happening, I don't know what's going to happen, I have no control, but I am working the steps. That's a gradual way to develop. But also what happens is I do this gradual work, and then something clicks into place. And that click we could call sudden. Insight sometimes comes suddenly, but it's usually based on a lot of gradual work. So sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, we begin to see the integration and our lives begin to change. I'll just say I was going to talk about this with kindness, is also learning how this is a spiritual awakening for me, is learning how to hold my emotions kindly. Learning, I used to say one of the things in my teaching was meditation is training you how to hold your negative feelings for longer and longer time periods. And if you can hold your negative emotions in awareness, they will actually digest themselves. And when they're completely digested, they will release. And it's not too much I, me. It's more that I'm able to stand it. I can endure, I can persevere with holding what I'm feeling, being kind to myself, kind to my suffering, and watching, observing that things are moving, I'm digesting it, I'm getting advice from other people, everything is moving. Stuckness is in our head because a basic principle in Buddhism is that everything changes. So if we hold it and watch it, we can see it change. And it used to take me months to get out of being stuck on a certain storyline or stuck on a certain emotion or hatred and resentment for a certain person. But lately it doesn't take me months. Sometimes it just takes me a couple of hours. Sometimes I do a lot of work, like do 4, 5, 6, and 7, pretty heavy for a week. Talk to people, go to therapy, really digest what's my fault, what's their fault, what do I want from the situation. I really process it. And then I can talk to that person, place, situation, or thing, and I don't hold it after that. It's digested and released. So that's the first part, what I wanted to say about a spiritual awakening for me. I'll just add, because I'm a Zen teacher, because I've done so many hours of meditating, I have had sudden mystical experiences that I could call a spiritual awakening, like, whoa. But you know what? Those are great. They increase your trust level. They change your mind. But unless you know how to work with them in your life, in your actual concrete husband, children, work life, they don't help all that much. So if you have one of these big burning bush experiences, and really after 50 years, I've had several of them and meditating as much as I have. But the most important thing for me is, how do I use that experience in my daily life to make me a more kind and useful person? So the 12th step moves us from having these personal freedoms and happiness, and helps us move in to how do we use that understanding in our daily life and for the benefit of all beings, they would say in Buddhism. And that now we're segueing into, we tried to carry this message to others. So what is a usable spiritual life? And this has to happen through maturity. So it takes a long time. It took me I'm going to swear. Is that okay? It took me my whole fucking life to know a little bit about how to give service and how to use my spiritual life for the benefit of others. So I have a little resentment there, right? That I wasn't able to do it. My life wasn't perfect at 45 or 55 or even 65. Now I'm 73 and I'm finally getting a taste of, what do they say? We will comprehend the word serenity and we will know peace. So after 48 years of program, I feel like I have a taste of that. And I'm very, very grateful that I feel this change in my life before I die. I'm very, very grateful. So in Zen, I'm a Dogen person. Dogen was a 13th century Zen teacher, very, very famous in the Soto school of Zen, which is what I'm from. And he has a whole chapter on Jijiyu Zanmai. It is in, maybe I'll spell that. Some of you might want to look it up. Jijiyu, Jijiyu. Then the next word is Zanmai, Zanmai. And the translation of that is, I love this. This is, I'm retiring in a way. I am writing a second book, and it's finished, but I have to edit it. And this year has been crazy, crazy making. So I haven't worked very much on the book in the last year, but hopefully when I settle down here, I'll be able to get the book out. But there's so many beautiful metaphors and phrases in Buddhism that you can think about for years. And they help you not intellectually understand spirituality, but understand it from your heart and your body. So sometimes they call these koans, sometimes they're just phrases. And Jujiyu Zanmai is one of my phrases. And the translation of Jujiyu Zanmai is self, receive, use, oneness. Self, receive, use, oneness. So there are a lot of different selves, but basically in Buddhism, you have an absolute self and you have a relative self. Your absolute self is your Godhead self. Some people call it child of God. Some people call the miracle of your own life. It's that you deserve to be here. And it's not just the story. The story is part of your relative life. Now, you can't ignore the story, as us addicts know. If you ignore the story, if you don't do 4 through 9, this shit just keeps happening and repeating and repeating. So you don't want to just ignore and see if you can find spirituality. These two, the spirit of myself, my soul self, and my storied karmic self have got to come together. And they do. If you work the steps, they will come together. And I have to receive who I am, both spiritually and story, narrative. And 4 through 9 will help you do that. What is it? We will not regret the past, nor wish to shut the door on it. It's not that we're ignoring our stories. It's that we've digested them and released them and learned from them and changed our behavior, changed our habit patterns, which can be done with 4 through 9. And 6 and 7 are very important, that this whole process will change you suddenly or gradually, with effort or without effort. So you do the effort of working the steps. That's called turning the Dharma wheel. That's my Judith Ragir's effort to go to meetings, to do the steps, to go to meditation retreats. There's effort in that. But actually, step 6 and 7, step 7 is no effort. I turn the Dharma wheel, and then the Dharma wheel turns me. So this process is both efforting and both effortless. And I have to learn how to work with that wheel. That's spirit. That's a spiritual process. So I receive myself, and part of receiving myself is stopping hating myself, which was a very deep root for me. Hating myself for being Jewish, hating myself for my family of origin, hating myself because I was abused, saying it was my fault I was sexually abused. There were so many ways I shut down. So I did not receive myself. And it wasn't until I had been working the middle steps, 4 through 9, a lot, that I began to say, I can receive Judith Ragir. She's okay. She's a good person. That little girl was lovely, sweet and innocent and beautiful. I always thought I was ugly. Now I see that was a crock of shit. I'm fine. I'm fine. This is receiving the self. And also, what helpful, step 7, is receiving that I'm God as well. I'm the absolute, my body, my DNA is beyond my wildest comprehension. The universe is beyond. When I got off that train at 16 years old and saw 1 million people living in Chicago, it blew my mind. So let your mind be blown. That's part of receiving the self. And the next one is use. What good is our wisdom? What good is our sobriety? What good is God consciousness if we aren't able to be good people, to use what we know for the benefit of other people? This is really the essence of step 12, I think, is taking what we've received, amazing what we've received, and offering it our example, our experience, strength, and hope, which I hope is what I'm doing right now, for others to benefit, for the benefit of others. And oneness is what you got to get it that you are a miracle. You have to get it that you're interconnected with everything else. You got to get it that you're not self-reliant, alone, and a bad person. You have to get this life is awe-inspiring. When you start to feel the oneness, it's not duality. It's not good and bad, right and wrong, sober, not sober. It's the whole works, as Dogen would say. It's everything working together that is the miracle of life. And that's the oneness, and that will help you to be useful. So I want to say something about service, because that's kind of what we're talking about, and 12th step is often reduced to service. I've done a lot of service, including what I'm doing right this very second. And a lot of my service over the last 50 years I have a critique. Though I did a lot of good things for people. So I'm loving myself for my sincerity. But a lot of my service has been self-aggrandizing, which I now realize. And that's not spiritual service. I was on the speaker, what do they call it? There's a list of speakers and everyone asks you to speak at the meeting. I did that for a couple of decades. Very active, always speaking at the meeting. And I'm a good speaker, so I would get a lot of accolades. But, it didn't actually help my self-hatred or my low self-esteem. It was kind of like a cover-up. Like if I got enough ambition, if I got to be a Zen teacher, then I'd be okay. Well, that's not what I want now. I don't want to pile on prestige. Oh, what is it in our traditions? I forget. I love that tradition where it says money, property, and prestige will divert us from our primary spiritual aim. So now I really think about my service. I also overworked because that was one of my modus operandi. So I just served and served and served, 12-stepping everybody. But my family wanted me more, or I needed to rest. I got so burnt out. Well, this was 6 years ago by being a Zen teacher. and taking care of everyone. It's kind of an Al-Anon issue, isn't it? I'm taking care of everybody. In my Al-Anon meeting, one guy always says, I'm responsible for everybody in a 400-mile radius. And that's kind of what I was like, taking care of everybody and having no energy for myself, for my own family, for rest, for fun, for play. So that's a cautionary tale about promotion. What do they say? Attraction, not promotion. If I'm spiritually fit, if I'm loving and kind, if I'm grounded and centered in my own life, that energy alone will help other people. I don't have to do big things to be of service. Little things. I don't have to look like an angel or a saint. This is what I'm calling aggrandizement or ego. That's my old patterning that doesn't think she's enough. So now, whenever I do something like give a talk like this, I really try to come from a different place in myself. I really try to do it with humility and try to have a loving affect, because that's what will teach people about spiritual life. Not my old harshness or my wanting to be larger than who I am. Just right-sized, humble, and kind. Isn't that a country song? Be humble and kind. It's a beautiful song. Who's it by? Oh, well, I can't remember his name. All right, let's go on. Practice these principles in all of our affairs. So what I did for this is I just took 2 lists of principles from Buddhism, and I thought I would share them with you. So I'm going to share my screen, hopefully. Let's see if I can do it. All right, so the paramitas, or perfections, are a big list in Buddhism of the qualities, of a Buddha, and also the qualities of a spiritual life, and the steps towards being free, having freedom, having a sense of interconnection, and knowing that everything changes, and not be circulating around itself all the time. Our desires are what's the most important. So that's what they call selflessness, is because of seeing this interconnection, seeing the huge perspective. We don't have to circulate, tighten up and circulate around our own desire systems. So I'm taking this from Mahayana Buddhism because that's Zen is a Mahayana. I know that the Vipassana people have a little bit of a different list. I saw it on Wikipedia, so if you want to get all the different lists, they're very easily available if you look under paramitas. So the 6 main paramitas that I go with are generosity, the giving of oneself, ethics, virtue, morals, discipline, patience, tolerance, forbearance, acceptance. Acceptance is the answer to all our problems. That would be in this paramita, and endurance. Energy is the vitality of our life, diligence, vigor, effort. Concentration is one-pointedness, a unified mind, meditation, and wisdom is insight. And for those of you who know this is the Prajna Paramita, and there are lots and lots of sutras elaborating on what wisdom, Prajna Paramita, means. Then they added 4 more to make the 10 paramitas. This is in Mahayana Buddhism. Skillful means, which is Really, this is about using your wisdom in any situation. What would be the most skillful thing to do? Do you give advice? Don't you give advice? Do you speak? Are you silent? Are you do tough love or nurturing love? There's always these decisions, and they're always about the present moment. Like, for example, with my sons. In one situation, the skillful mean might be a little tougher, but in another situation, the skillful mean might be nurturing and not tough at all. So in every moment, we have to understand what's the appropriate response to this very specific moment, and that's called skillful means. A vow, resolution, aspiration, or determination. Spiritual power, which is a little iffy. I say that if you have a concentrated mind, you have a lot of power to change yourself, to change your activities. You're formidable. But if you use that power for power over, for hurting others, and as we see, a lot of spiritual teachers have used their power in a negative way. So that's for sure we don't want to do. And then the last one is knowledge. And that's very, very broad. And then we have the precepts, which I've gone over before. We did this in step 4. But again, these are the principles that we need to use in our life. I'll just read them. And the first one is the positive, and the second one is the do not. Respect life. Do not kill. Be giving. Do not steal. Honor the body. Do not misuse sexuality. Manifest truth. Do not lie. Proceed clearly. Do not intoxicate the mind. See the perfection. Do not speak of others' errors and faults. Realize self and others as one. Do not elevate the self and blame others. Give generously. Do not be withholding or stingy. Actualize harmony. Do not indulge in anger. Experience the intimacy of things. Do not defile Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. The last thing I want to talk about is compartmentalization. What I'm experiencing now in my spiritual life is, let's see, how shall I say this? Every moment, every morning, every action, every afternoon, every evening, every day, every interaction with my son, every interaction with a stranger, every interaction with my neighbor, all of the events that arise in my life in one day, in my regular, ordinary human life, every moment is a little too, it's hard to do every moment, but every event or situation is really an opportunity for me to express my spiritual life, not my ego, resentful, you're not doing what I want life. And it's not compartmentalized, pretty much not anymore. It's not like I'm one way with 12-step people and I'm one way at the office. Or I'm one way when I go to the monastery and I'm an asshole when I come home. I used to feel that too. Like I would be so peaceful and happy at the monastery. And then I'd walk in the door with the dishes and the dog and my 2 sons mad at me because I was at the monastery too long. I was like barraged, and I kept them separate. I kept my fellowship friends separate from my regular friends. Now it's all smushed together. I used to keep Zen separate from 12-step until 2004, when I started to do these 12-step in Buddhism meetings. And all of a sudden, my life just, that it wasn't separated anymore. It was all one spiritual life, one day. How do I express myself today? And it's not about transcendence. It's about how to use oneness, how to use the wisdom that I have gotten from my spiritual life, from coming to meetings, from all of you, how to use it so that I'm a helpful person, so that I don't react and yell at everybody at the drop of a hat, that I don't interfere with other people's lives. You know, that's something about service too. Now, I really want everyone to have their own agency. I want to empower other people to make their own choices. I can hold the space for them to make their choice. I can maybe ask good questions or reflect back to them what they said, but I'm not giving them advice. I'm not trying to control them. I don't have the power. I came to believe that I am powerless over my addiction, but also people, places, and things. And that spiritual life happens in the moment. It doesn't happen in my head. It happens. How am I practicing? How am I expressing myself in this moment? So self, receive, use, oneness. And I'll just end with, when I first started program, I thought I would just transcend my storyline. I'd become a different person, and maybe I'd become a saint. That's what I hoped. My perfectionism was still quite strong, you know, and I tried. I think becoming a Zen teacher was about as close as I could get, you know, to looking good. You know, Zen teachers wear all this clothes. I mean, I didn't even look like myself. Often I shaved my head and I had gorgeous Japanese robes on. But that's now I'm not, I don't have to look different. I can truly, sincerely be Judith Ragir, both her Buddha self and her narrative. I can bring them together. And if my mindfulness is strong enough, I can choose. I have choice about how I react to people, places, and things. And I can practice being more kind. The Dalai Lama, when asked, what is his religion? He said, my religion is kindness. And another time, when he said, well, someone asked him, what is Buddhism? He said, training the mind. So if we can bring those two advice, training the mind, which is being no stinking thinking, folks. Train your mind and learn about kindness. And you know what? The hardest one is to be kind to me. Right now, I feel kind of kind to myself, so that's good. That's good. Okay, I'm going to stop talking and we have a half an hour more for you to discuss.
Thank you so much, Judith.